Okay, welcome back, everyone. How are we doing today?
Pretty good.
Good.
Good. How are you,
Good.
Professor?
I'm doing okay. Thank you for asking, Sean. Are there any questions about
I
anything?
have a question regarding
Yes.
the essay.
Yes.
So I went back over, I was in class when you were talking about it, and then last night I went back and watched when you were recording it for class. So basically we're just finding anything like from newspapers or articles from that time and writing about what they thought was important, or are we writing about like big events?
Well, that's a very good question. And in the meantime, I have found some more sources that I'll show you. I put them up on the, more newspapers, mainly British. Yeah, you're writing about what you find interesting.
Okay.
So what is the story you get out of these sources?
Let's say there was like a small article in the newspaper about something that was just like something current that we would see in a newspaper today. Like we could pick something from back then that was a topic
Yes.
and write about that.
Yes.
And like
exactly.
what happened in the, okay.
Exactly. And what can you learn from this? I mean, it's quite likely you'll get one piece of this, but won't be able to get the whole story, but you have to try to figure out what it is. So it's not look for the big events, but what else is there? I mean, that's really where we learn things, is by these juxtapositions we find, or by the unexpected things. You're really immersing yourself in a different world. Does this make any more sense to you?
Yeah, so you're just like finding like current events at that time that were going on around everything else.
Or anything, yeah, yes. I've had students who've written about the ads you find, or about other things that you're going to find in the newspaper that, maybe you expected this, or maybe you didn't expect this. Finding what you didn't expect is usually better, because if you just go in with your preconceived notions about what's going to be important, you're just going to find the same stuff. So it really is exploring the source more than anything else.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes more sense now.
Good. And later on in the class, I think we will break into groups just so people can tell each other what they're doing and ask questions and get more of a sense of what the assignment is.
Okay.
So, okay.
That'll be helpful. So.
Good. Any other questions on anything at all? Okay. I'm happy to proceed in any number of ways, like responding to your questions, or as you probably know, Ainsley's already looking at her watch thinking, boy, how much more of this do we have to do? She's going to get to her destination before I finish talking.
I was looking at the date.
Okay, it's the 23rd. Okay. Yeah, boy, is it still the 23rd? Oh my God, how is it? Yeah. Okay, good. So as I think I left, where did we leave off last time?
We were talking about Bacchus's congregation and how he didn't want to pay taxes.
Right, the Baptists, yeah. Okay,
Talking about that canon.
Canon. Okay, they moved the canon. Yes, that was a dramatic story. Other things happening in this period that do you remember?
That Thomas Gage wanted to disarm some of the towns.
He did, yeah. Okay, good. This is good. So you have a number of different things going on here. Anyone else want to weigh in with what most important event they remember from Monday? It could be kind of a good quiz question. What's the most important thing you remember from Monday? Okay, let me see if I can share this with you. Okay, good. So what's happening then over these months between the Continental Congress and the spring of 1775? Congress said we will reconvene in May of 1775. And that's in order to give the king and parliament time to respond to their petition to the king. And also, as I said, there's this election going on for the parliament. And the thinking is, if the Whigs get a majority in parliament, then they will oust the government of Lord North, and they will make a more conciliatory policy toward the Americans. And this is not an unrealistic hope that the election is going to turn in the Whigs' favor. Of course, it doesn't. The English Whigs are very poorly organized, can't get their act together. And so Lord North and his party are reelected. And in February of 1775, by the way, before I get on much further in this, I should warn you, the Congress of the United States has designated the Battle of Point Pleasant in what is now West Virginia, which happened in early September of 1774, to be the first battle in the American Revolution. Congress made this designation in 1908. So it's been over a century since Congress acknowledged Point Pleasant, West Virginia, to be the real starting point of the Revolutionary War. And I'm guessing none of you is from West Virginia. Has anyone been to Point Pleasant, West Virginia? Okay, well, I've actually been there at least twice that I can remember. And there was a battle there in September of 1774 between forces led by the Virginia militia against the Shawnee Indians. And this was actually one of the big battles in a war between the Virginians and the Shawnee. Lord Dunmore was the governor of Virginia at the time, so sometimes this is called Lord Dunmore's War. And many of the men on the Virginia side who survived the battle went on to serve in the Revolutionary War. It does happen before. Has anyone heard of this battle before? The Battle of Point Pleasant, West Virginia?
I've heard about it, but I don't know much about it.
Okay, so you have heard that there was a battle at Point Pleasant. Anyone else? I'm not going to start prying. What else do you know about it? To my knowledge, and nothing against Point Pleasant, West Virginia, which seemed like a perfectly nice place, only two things of any significance have happened there. And one, of course, is this battle I have mentioned. And the other thing happened in the 1970s. This is on the Ohio River, and there was a bridge across the Ohio River at Point Pleasant. And this bridge collapsed in the 1970s, causing a number of fatalities, a great engineering failure, catastrophe. And there were reports of a figure called Mothman appearing at the scene of this calamity. And hence this has become kind of a cult thing in certain circles. There's a movie made about this, Mothman. And so every September, happening to coincide with the anniversary roughly of the battle, there is a Mothman festival in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. And it's just been purely coincidence that my visits have coincided with Mothman. And if you go in for dressing in black and pursuing the goth lifestyle, you've probably already been to Point Pleasant. This apparently is a big goth gathering for those of that persuasion in the upper Ohio River Valley. So that happened in the Battle of Point Pleasant. And who are we to begrudge Point Pleasant its few historical events? However, I should say in 1908, Congress designated the Battle of Point Pleasant to be the first battle in the Revolutionary War. And this was over the objection of the West Virginia state historian, who said quite correctly that this battle had nothing at all to do with the Revolutionary War. And he was right. But who is he to disagree with Congress? I bet he lost his job once the West Virginia delegation got home and realized he had been speaking ill of them. You know, my real question in this is when Congress is designating this to be an historical event that begins the Revolutionary War, my question always is, where was the Massachusetts delegation that day? You know, our senator at the time, Henry Cabot Lodge, had a PhD in history. Was he like not there when Congress was voting on this? Or did he feel it would be unseemly for the senator from Massachusetts to correct his colleagues from West Virginia? Anyway, I'm getting off on a tangent, but this does illustrate a historical fallacy. In fact, one of the primary historical fallacies, the Latin phrase is post hoc ergo propter hoc, which means before the or after this, therefore because of this. So something happens, then something else happens. If these are the only two events we know about, we may imagine one caused the other. But the Battle of Point Pleasant, interesting story, very important in Native American history and history of what happens in the Ohio River Valley. One of the Shawnee warriors who dies leaves behind a son named Tecumseh, who will grow up to be a great Indian warrior and lead a united Indian Confederation against the Americans in the first and second decade of the 19th century, but nothing really to do with the American Revolution. And that's our focus. So now you know, okay? If anyone
So
asks you.
how large was this battle?
It was quite significant. You know, there were several hundred, maybe 1,000 people involved, including the Native Americans who had come across the river, attacked this camp, which wasn't expecting them, and then slips back across the river. And then Lord Dunmore leads another force into Ohio. So it's a fairly significant battle. It's not a minor skirmish. Compared to, say, Lexington and Concord, it's a much bigger battle than Lexington or Concord, which are really skirmishes. There are about 800 men involved on the British side. At Lexington Green, there may be about 70 or 80. And then at Concord, there are several hundred, maybe 1,000 militia forces. So those are less big battles than Point Pleasant. So you're disappointed. Why am I not talking about this big battle? Instead, I've been talking about what people are gassing on about in these legislative hearings and so on. So does that answer your question? I realize you asked a question which had a fairly simple answer. And
Yeah,
going on
it did
and on and
answer
on.
my
Okay,
question.
good. Okay, so now you know there was a battle at Point Pleasant, and it was a big one. In terms of does it have to do with the American Revolution? I will say nothing really, but not to take anything away from the good people in West Virginia. Okay, so let's go back to where I was a few minutes ago. Good, okay. So you see more British warships. The port of Boston is closed in June, and there still is something approaching normal life happening. Although, as I mentioned, in September, when there is the attack on the Loyalists in Cambridge, they will come into Boston. This is the town of Boston here on this peninsula. This is Long Wharf. And so you can see it is almost an island. So here, this is a British fortification here to prevent anyone from coming in. Another British fortification. This is Boston Neck, this narrow isthmus here. And this is essentially today Washington Street, if you are familiar with Washington Street. And this, where the narrowest point is today, is roughly Berkeley Street, if you're familiar with that area. And then you see over here is the Charlestown Peninsula. This is Charlestown, a settled area. There are hills behind it. This is Cambridge. And over here is the town of Roxbury, Dorchester. This is Dorchester Neck here, pasture land. In fact, it's pasture land belonging to the town of Dorchester. This is where people in Dorchester would graze their cattle. Noddle's Island, another part of the town of Boston, where people in Boston would graze their cattle. And this is Chelsea Creek. There's a ferry that runs roughly from here in Chelsea to Boston. There's another ferry roughly from here in the north end of Boston to Charlestown. And so the British occupy the town of Boston and are still relying on people in the surrounding towns to provide them with fresh food, that is fresh produce, as well as beef and lamb and other things, and also firewood. All of these towns are going to have woodlots where people will have their firewood they can cut down. So this is the state of things in Boston, fall of 1774, early 1775, as we're really waiting to see what happens next. And I think I mentioned last time, and one of you reminded me, the general gauge is disarming the countryside. There is the powder house I mentioned is up here. He had sent a force up the Mystic River. And then in February, he sends another force up to Salem on a Sunday morning to get the ammunition, weapons being stockpiled there. And before he arrives, the people in Salem have gotten the word, and so they've hidden everything. And the story is that Captain Leslie arrives with his force. It's a Sunday morning, and he has to cross a certain bridge in Salem, and the townspeople have taken the precaution of putting the bridge up so he can't cross. And the minister of the church comes out and asks what, trying to calm things down. And Leslie is insisting that they need to close the bridge so he can march across. They don't want to do that. They don't want to let the bridge down. And ultimately what happens in February of 1775, neither side really wants to start an armed conflict here. And so when it becomes clear that what Leslie needs to do is be able to go back to Boston and say, I looked and I didn't find anything, if they let him go across, march across the bridge with his men, they'll go maybe 100 yards, then they'll turn around, come back. And so this is essentially what happens. They lower the bridge, Leslie and his force march across the bridge, go 100 yards, and then they retreat, and he goes back to Boston and says, I looked, didn't find anything. Really a clever way of averting an armed conflict, which neither side really wants at this point. And they know how close they could come to an armed conflict. And Leslie wants to avert it, which he does in February. Now, while this is happening, off in Britain, the Parliament is meeting. And Parliament is debating what to do about the Americans. Or, as I said, the Whigs, who had hoped to get a majority in Parliament, would have wanted to call off this war. That is, they believe the conflict was started by the belligerent and stupid policies of the Tories. Once the Tories are out, we'll rescind all of these laws that have upset the Americans, and everyone will go back happily to being one part of one big, happy empire. So the Whigs, who do have a certain amount of support in Parliament, are pushing for reconciliation with the Americans and arguing quite effectively for the American cause, short of independence. The Tories are saying, no, we really need to show some more force. So what Parliament decides to do is send a bigger military force to North America, thinking here, Gage hasn't been able to accomplish this with a force at hand, just has a little more force that is going, think about it. Who are these people resisting? They don't have military experience. They don't have manufactories that can turn out weapons in large numbers. And Britain has a much bigger, I shouldn't say a much bigger navy. Britain has a huge navy. These people have none. So how will they resist? What we need to do is show a little more force. So Parliament votes to send more force to the Americas. Actually, they send 3 generals. Gage, they think, is, he's really not been very effective at this. So Gage is going to be sacked. And in his place, the British are going to send, in fact, 3 generals. One is General Howe, Lord Howe, whose brother is actually the leading admiral in the British fleet. And Howe, by the way, had just been elected to Parliament. He was against the war measures that the Tories were taking. That is, he wanted reconciliation with the Americas. And Howe's brother, he has one brother who's the admiral, his older brother George had died in the last war in North America, leading troops from Massachusetts. And Massachusetts actually built a monument to George Howe that is in Westminster Abbey. This is something really quite meaningful to the Howes, the brothers Howe. One is a general and one is an admiral. In fact, in the fall of 1774, the Howe brothers were meeting in London clandestinely with Benjamin Franklin. This is kind of an interesting story. Franklin, as I said, was really ostracized from British society in January of 1774. He goes to one of his clubs late in the summer, and someone approaches him and says, there's a lady who would like to play chess with you, and he hands him an address. Well, Franklin was a great chess player, but he didn't have an interest in playing chess with this particular lady who seemed to want to play chess with him. The next week, goes back to the club. The same man says, there's a lady who'd really like to play chess with you. This time Franklin looks at the note. The lady who wants to play chess with Benjamin Franklin is Catherine Howe, the sister of General Howe and Admiral Howe. So Franklin does call on Catherine Howe, and this is a pretext for Catherine's brothers to come so they can talk to Benjamin Franklin about ways that the British Empire can avert having a war with the American colonies. it doesn't work. I mean, they do talk about possibilities of reconciliation, but here is General William Howe now sent to lead these British forces in North America against the Americans. And another general is Sir Henry Clinton. And Clinton had spent much of his childhood in New York, where his father was the royal governor. And he is a very good general. He gets kind of a bad rap during the Revolution, but here's the thinking. And by the way, if you ever are planning any kind of a strategic thing, this is a big mistake to do it the way the British did. Howe is being sent to replace Gage. And it's not clear when exactly Gage is going to leave. So as long as Gage is there, Howe may be in charge, but Howe is also going to be his replacement. And then the thinking is, once Howe is done, Clinton will replace him. So it's an interesting idea that you're going to send over the replacement for the guy who is there, plus his replacement. You can imagine this may cause a bit of tension among these three guys. And the third general is this one, John Burgoyne. And Burgoyne is a London playboy, and he is sent over because he said they needed a third wheel on this particular carriage. So these guys leave England in March or so on their way to basically just be there with more force. By this time, they think the rebellion will have died out. Who will want to have kept up the rebellion over the winter? They'll see what's happening when they get to Boston. Now, the Secretary of State for American Affairs also writes to Gage as this is happening and tells him he should use a little more force in trying to put down this rebellion. Make a few more efforts to find the weapons that these people are stockpiling and prevent hostilities. So this is what happens. And Gage gets this information in April before these other generals arrive. So Gage decides what he'll do is try to, he knows that they're stockpiling weapons out in the town of Concord. This is where he thinks those cannon had disappeared to. And so in April of 1775, Gage launches a secret expedition to seize these weapons being stockpiled in Concord. This, of course, is one of the great stories of the Revolution. I don't know how much detail you need for this. Let me see another map of Boston. But Gage's idea is to send 800 men, actually grenadiers, on this expedition, essentially going out about 10 miles this way past Cambridge. And of course, the big question is, how will they go? One way would be, the standard way would be to march this way through Roxbury. There's a little bridge over the Charles River here near Harvard Square, and then out that way. Now, there's another possibility, which is to get into boats and simply go across the river here and see how much marching you're going to cut out on this. The idea is we want to get there just at sunup. And so the thinking is, if everyone leaves by midnight, get across the river, that way we'll be able to get there before the sun is up and no one will know we're coming. And so that's the basic idea. There are a couple of problems with it. One, there are still a lot of people in Boston who are part of the Patriot cause. One is Joseph Warren. And you cannot prepare 800 men to go on an expedition like this. I mean, you're going to need to get boats if they're going to be going this way across the river, or you're going to need to prepare them for a march if you're going this way. And there's really no way of doing this without getting the word out. Gage does send a few spies out. They get as far as Worcester, these spies who are supposed to be finding out what's happening here. Are people in the countryside mobilizing? But it is so obvious to everyone they meet that these two guys are spies that people give them all kinds of misinformation about what's happening. So Joseph Warren finds out that these guys are planning to go out to Concord. And there's different speculation about how Warren finds this out. Let me see if one is Warren was a doctor. And one of his patients is Margaret Kemble Gage, Mrs. Gage, who was actually from New York. So she's an American. And there is some thinking that Mrs. Gage might be passing information to the Americans, to Dr. Warren. Probably not true. Makes a good story for a novel about Margaret Gage and young Joseph Warren, who's a recent widower. He does have a long-term relationship with another woman, and he's an interesting guy in a lot of ways. Probably not getting this information from Margaret Kemble Gage, but he is someone very much on the alert as to what's happening. And so they know the secret's kind of out. And so Warren, when he knows on the 18th of April, this, by the way, is the Powder House. This is 1775, Lila. Sorry for getting ahead of the story.
No, it's okay. I just kind of lost track when you started talking about Gage sending out to launch secret expeditions.
Yeah, this is in early 1775. Gage is sending out the spies and all, because he's planning now to go and seize these weapons the way he had tried to do in Salem, the way he had in Charlestown. Also in December, he had sent an expedition up to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where there was a fort. That particular fort had been alerted by the messenger system that Warren has in place. Paul Revere, in fact, took the message up to Portsmouth to get the militia ready for the British coming to Fort William and Mary that's in Portsmouth Harbor. So you have this patriot movement having these emissaries various ways, having really control of the countryside, and General Gage is now trying to assert that same control. And so he does send out, he's getting his forces ready, and Warren gets Paul Revere and William Dawes to carry the same message that the Redcoats are heading out to Concord. And we'll go back to these images. Okay. So this is William Dawes. And the plan is Revere is rowed across the river into Charlestown. Dawes slips by the British sentries at Boston Neck. He slips by just pretending that he is a drunken farmer, which apparently was not a difficult act for Dawes to pull off. And these two guys get out of Boston and they go through the countryside alerting people as to the British advance. Now, if you learn nothing else this semester, neither Revere nor Dawes yells, "The British are coming." That's because, of course, everyone is British. What they would do is they knew which house to go to in each town. This is the house of a leader of the Committee of Safety. These are committees started by the town meetings to stockpile weapons and do these other things, or a leader of the local Sons of Liberty. And they will wake someone up and say, the regulars are out. And then that person will alert the other members of his committee in that town. And another thing they'll start doing, the signal for the militia to muster is when the church bell rings in the town. So someone goes to the meeting house and starts ringing the bell. So this is happening after about 10 or 11 o'clock at night. Revere is going this way and Dawes is going this way. And then these other people they're alerting are getting all of their folks out to prepare for something. They don't know what it is. They know there's this expedition heading out to Concord. And by the time the British troops are in their boats going across the river, and by the way, you can see this is similar to the maps the British would have had. It's not that detailed. So here you see, this looks like marshy area along the shore. This is the low tide mark. So at high tide, the water would come up to the shore. At low tide, the water would be roughly out here. And the British didn't have a good grasp of the tide. And so their boats are only able to get them about here, which means everyone has to get out and then march ashore through this marsh. And then once they're there, they have to find their way to the road. On paper, it looks like a relatively easy thing to do. In practice, it's a difficult thing to do. And by the time these guys are wading ashore, they can hear church bells ringing off in the distance. which means people out there know we're coming. And so they do muster here on the road. They march through Cambridge out to Lexington, and they had planned to be in Concord by the time the sun was up. They actually get to Lexington at about 7 in the morning. The sun is already up, and the Lexington militia has been waiting for them for most of the night. And in fact, at one time, many of the militiamen had gone home thinking, okay, this must have been a false alarm. So it's around 11 or 12 o'clock when the guys in Lexington had gotten the word. And by that's about the same time, many of these the British Army is basically getting ashore in Cambridge. And they still have about 12, 15 miles to march. So it's not going to be a surprise when the British arrive at Lexington Green early the next morning. And this is a shot of Lexington Green. Here you can see there's a meeting house on the corner of the green. There's a tavern over here, which is where the militia had spent much of the night waiting. And about 70 militiamen stand on the green, and it's unclear what's going to happen. The British officer tells them to disperse. The men don't really disperse quickly enough. Someone from this side fires a gun. To this day, no one knows who fired that particular gun. Was it someone on the British side? Was it someone on the Lexington Minutemen? Was it someone someone who had a gun? And with that, the British open fire, and they kill 8 of the Lexington militiamen. The Captain Prescott, orders his men to disperse, and they do. And then the British march on to Concord, which was their objective. So this is the first skirmish here, which leads about 7 or 8 of the colonists dead. Okay, thank you. Ainsley asked, when Samuel Prescott joined this ride, there were 3 riders, Dawes and Revere, and Samuel Prescott joined them sometime, I think it was around Lexington, and he went to other places to alert people that this was happening. He had been out actually visiting his girlfriend when he runs into Revere and Dawes, and then he goes off to warn people in other areas. There's a very good book on this. I don't know if I've assigned it. I should have checked the syllabus, by David Hackett Fisher, called Paul Revere's Ride, that will tell you all of this in gripping prose. Okay. So having gotten to Lexington, the British forces march on to Concord. Remember, that was their objective, to go to Concord, find the weapons that are being stockpiled. And that they start doing. Now, by this time, more militia are coming onto the scene. And the militia mustering point is north of the town of Concord, in fact, across the Concord River. Then there's a bridge over the Concord River. There are 2 bridges over the Concord River, one on the south side of town, one on the north side of town, and the militia muster on Barrett's farm, north of the North Bridge, on this broad meadow overlooking the river, and it's a hillside. And now militia are coming in from Bedford and Lincoln and other surrounding towns as they've heard this alarm that Prescott had carried. And while they're mustering, they see the British force. Actually, they don't really see the British force. The British force is going through the town of Concord looking for the weapons that have been stockpiled. Those mysterious cannon actually had been sunk in a pond, and other pieces, big pieces, had been hidden. Some were actually hidden on Barrett's farm. One reason they didn't want the British to get as far as Barrett's farm. And so the British are searching the town, and they do find some things. And so they set up a bonfire in front of the meeting house to burn all this equipment. And the fire actually spreads to the meeting house. Then the soldiers and the townspeople join together to put this fire out. So this is what's happening in Concord as they're finding this. The British had sent another scouting party to the North Bridge to go inspect Barrett's farm. They cross the bridge, and then they see this big militia force on the other side of the bridge. So they go back to the other side of the river, closer to the town. And meanwhile, the militiamen on this hillside overlooking Concord are seeing smoke rising. And they don't realize that there's a bonfire and that the British soldiers and the locals are putting the fire out. They think that the British have set fire to the town. And as you can imagine, this doesn't make them any easier about what the British are up to. And the British force again tries to cross the bridge, and this militia force from Lincoln, Bedford, other places marches down to the bridge and prevents them from crossing. And actually, when the British this time order these men to disperse, they don't, and they fire back at the British. Now, the captain in charge of the British expedition, who was a man named Smith, realizes he has nothing to gain by being here at this bridge, so he orders his men to retreat. Now, if you're one of these militia forces, what you've seen is our side has fired on the British and they are retreating. This is something the British Army never does. So they start pursuing them, and they pursue them back into Concord and keep pursuing this British force as it's now making its way back to Boston. Now, as the British force has been moving back to Boston this way, going through Lexington, the militia forces from surrounding areas are now arriving on the scene. And they see this British Army making its way through the through this countryside, or actually along this road, and they start firing at them from every available place. And here in Menotomy, which is now the town of Arlington, you have the most severe fighting as more troops have arrived here. This is about the middle of the day, where these British soldiers have been up since they had gotten underway at about 11 o'clock, 10 or 11 o'clock the previous night. So these guys have been on their feet now for 18 hours, and they had some pretty intense fighting in Concord, and now they have really intense fighting along the road back. And General Gage sends out a relief expedition under Captain Prescott to go out and relieve them. And he gets here and he finds that the colonists have actually taken the bridge apart across the Charles River. So he does have his men put the bridge back together, and he is trying to bring heavier equipment with him. The Grenadiers hadn't brought any cannon or anything else. They thought this was a relatively short expedition. And he does get here in time to help rally the rest of the British forces, who then are able, under heavy fire, to continue their march through Charlestown. And they get to the Charlestown Peninsula by the end of the day. And with that, the various militia forces who had been pursuing, and the militia forces came, by this time, some had come from New Hampshire to the north, or from Rhode Island to the south, or even Connecticut from the southwest. You have somewhere between 10 and 20,000 militia troops who are now camped from Cambridge and actually the hills here in what then was Charlestown, today is Somerville, across here into Roxbury and Dorchester. So by the end of the day, on the 19th of April of 1775, you have General Gage and his troops in Boston and in Charlestown, the British fleet in the harbor, and the surrounding area in the possession of these militia troops. And we don't know how many militia troops there were. This is really the beginning of a war. The war begins on this day. And at the end of the day, when Gage is writing his dispatches back to London, he's not referring to the colonists or the Massachusetts people. He's referring to the enemy, because now this is an armed conflict, and there definitely are two sides. And there's Gage and the British force in Boston, and there is this real collection of militia forces surrounding Boston, which also means Gage and the British forces in Boston are shut off from fresh food, firewood, other things they need. So this is what's happening in the spring of 1775 when the war begins. Now remember, the Congress was going to come back into session in May when they got their answer from the Crown as to what's going to happen in North America. And so Congress says, okay, we did get our answer. We wanted to know what if the king is going to let up, and the answer actually is no, that there's going to be more of this armed, they're going to try to crush the rebellion. And Congress then has to decide a number of things. It's actually, by the way, at this session of Congress, George Washington arrives and he is wearing his uniform from the previous war. It's actually quite a feat that he was still fit into this uniform, but Washington said it was a signal that the time for talking is over. It's now a time for fighting. And Washington is put on the committee to plan for the defenses of New York, because they know that's going to be the British real next objective, and also to plan for how to turn this militia force into an army. I should say, no one is more anxious to have these 20,000 troops turned into an army than the provincial government of Massachusetts. You'll recall the provincial government is now meeting as the provincial Congress, and they have 20,000 guys with guns surrounding Boston. That's a great thing if you're the British Army, but also it's going to be a very disruptive thing because these are guys that are militia service, means every year they get together one day, they elect their officers, they have to show that their weapons can fire, so they fire off their weapons, they elect their officers, and then typically they get really drunk. And they get paid for this. I mean, once you're in the militia, if you're actually in active service, you're being paid by the town, and then the town is paid by the province. And you have these guys from different towns, and often people from different towns don't. Yes, Lila, you have another question?
Are the men that were turning the militia form into an army and like the 20,000 men with guns surrounding Boston, that's the British?
Those are the Americans.
Those are the Americans
the
surrounding
Americans.
Boston?
Yeah.
Okay.
If you're a man between the ages of 16 and 60, you are required to be part of your town militia. And you train usually one day a year to make sure your gun can fire, you can listen to orders. And also the militia, you elect your own officers. And it could be that a town may have several militia units. Usually these are formed by different guys in the town. And they're guys who, they want to be in one guy's unit instead of another guy's unit. In fact, sometimes these units don't really get along. And that's one reason you're going to join one unit as opposed to another. And you elect the officers, which means the officer is someone you elect. It means that officer might be reluctant to give you orders or order you to do things. And these guys, when they do have to go into service, they are paid. They have to be paid every day, which is why the state archives has very good records as to who was in the militias, because each town would send in its report so that the town could be reimbursed for paying these guys. And they're paid differently. And this is something that's going to cause friction in this camp, because in Connecticut and in Rhode Island and in New Hampshire, you're paid on the first of the month. In Massachusetts, you're paid on the full moon or with a new moon. So it means the guys in Massachusetts, there was a new moon about a week ago, okay? So those guys just got paid. If you're from Connecticut or Rhode Island, how come we have to wait another week and a half to get paid? Also, a regiment from Connecticut has 800 men, a regiment from Massachusetts has 1,100 men. And you can't really tell these guys to do the necessary things you need in a camp, like dig latrines. I mean, who wants to go around digging latrines? You came here to fight, but now you're in this camp. So now it's, it's April, May, you're camping out in Cambridge or in Roxbury. That can be kind of fun. You're getting paid for it. And guys show up to sell alcohol to the soldiers. And there's one thing the soldiers like to do is fire off their weapons because it's fun, but they also get into a lot of fights with each other. So it's kind of a brawling mob here camped out. And Massachusetts really wants someone to take charge of this. So Congress begins deliberating, turning these militia forces into a continental army. And as I said, Washington was on the committee planning this. And as Congress is beginning its deliberations, John Adams, delegate from Massachusetts, says we've been discussing creating an army, but we also should talk about who is going to command the army. He said, I have someone in mind. Someone who has military experience, someone who has a large fortune, he's already committed to the cause, and someone who is known and trusted throughout the colonies. Now, as he is saying this, the president of the Congress sits up, John Hancock, president of Congress. Hancock, of course, has military experience. He is the commander of the 1st Corps of Cadets, one of the militia groups in Boston. He has a large fortune. He is already committed to the cause. And also, he is known throughout the Congress. After all, he's president of the Congress. Hancock thinks, well, of course, I am going to be the commander of the army, because this is a New England army, and who else would command it but someone from New England? And Adams sees this. He sees Hancock suddenly noticing that he's about to be called upon to lead this army. And out of Adams's other eye, he sees Washington. And Washington begins to suspect maybe Adams is talking about me. And Washington leaves the room. And then when Adams says, the person I have in mind is George Washington of Virginia, Hancock's face freezes. He glowers at Adams and never speaks to him again. And later that day, Washington tells Patrick Henry, you may count on it. From this day, you can trace the ruin of my reputation. Washington realizes what he's getting into. And he sets off almost immediately for Cambridge to take command of this militia force, which he hopes to turn into a continental army. Okay. Washington is in New York when a dispatch arrives from Boston from Cambridge about the battle that had taken place on Bunker Hill in June of 1775. There's another skirmish I should mention at Chelsea Creek. This is now Chelsea Creek. Noddle's Island is now East Boston, and it's pasture land. And some of the militia forces went to Noddle's Island to drive off the livestock, drive the cattle and sheep from Noddle's Island to Hog Island, and then the cattle, sheep, and hogs from Hog Island here, so that the British wouldn't have access to this. And while they're doing this, someone set fire to a barn here. A British sentry in the north end sees this, and so the British send a small boat, the Diana, up into Chelsea Creek, and it starts firing at these militia troops driving the livestock across Noddle's Island. Now, if you're in a boat, you're firing a gun, you can't really elevate it that much. So they have a disadvantage here. And more militia are here in Chelsea, and the boat winds up running aground just off the Chelsea ferry, and the British sailors swim away from the boat, and the Americans wind up capturing the boat because it ran aground at low tide. First naval capture of the Revolution. And so this is the Battle of Chelsea Creek in May. And then in June of 1775, the British plan a bigger assault. This is after the new generals have arrived. And remember, these guys had left England with a bigger military force, thinking that there is a minor rebellion going on. There isn't really a mobilized population. The problem has been Gage hasn't taken a strong enough hand. So these guys are going to come here and basically show the rebels who is boss. And when they arrive, this is after Lexington and Concord, they find out that Boston is now surrounded by 20,000 armed men. And Burgoyne is asked, well, what are you going to do about that? And he says, we'll get a little elbow room. And this is basically the plan for what happens next. As I said, the rebels are camped out from here to here, and from Prospect Hill and Cambridge to the Roxbury High Fort. And the idea is we'll cross over, we'll bring more forces into Charlestown, and we'll march this way, dispersing the rebels. By the end of the first day, we'll be in Cambridge. And it's the mere sight of this British army is going to make the rebels disperse. And then from Cambridge, and we'll camp there in Cambridge. The next night, they will march to Roxbury. We'll secure a bigger perimeter for us, drive the rebels away, and this will be a lot better for everyone. And so this is the British plan. Of course, it takes longer for them to get across, and as they are preparing this, the Americans get wind of this plan. And they have a fortification, Colonel Prescott leads a force to fortify Bunker Hill. The thinking is you fortify this hill, the highest hill in Charlestown, that will help you prevent the British advance. Prescott gets there and he says, well, wouldn't it make more sense to fortify Breed's Hill? So that's what he begins to do. He and his men spend the night fortifying Breed's Hill. Now, another command led by Israel Putnam from Connecticut comes on the scene. They're sent to reinforce Prescott, and he says, what an idiot. He was supposed to fortify Breed's Hill. If the British get into Charlestown and take Bunker Hill, they'll be able to force him out. So Putnam fortifies Bunker Hill. And another force from New Hampshire, led by John Stark, comes on the scene. And Stark says, these two guys are really morons. The British can land here, and then they can actually cut each one off. So Stark fortifies this area here. These guys are operating under the assumption the other two are morons. Meanwhile, on the other side, the British are preparing for a 3-day campaign, which means they are spending the morning baking bread, roasting meat, getting their packs together, and they're carrying enough for a 3-day campaign. And this is June, and the weather has turned. It's now hot and humid and miserable, as you know it does get in Boston sometimes, when they start landing at about noon. And they start marching up this hill. The day before, they had scouts look at these hills, and there was nothing here. And they get to the top, and these guys have dug in these fortifications, which you can't see until you're right on them. And the guys in the first fortification open fire. And they pick out the officers, who are easy to distinguish, knowing if the officers are done, there's really nothing the men can do. Suffice to say, this is a battle that goes on for several hours. And we'll put it this way. Over the course of the revolution, which is going to go on for 8 more years, something like 75 British officers will be killed in battle. 25 of them die on this day, the 17th of June of 1775. And at the end of the day, the Americans are out of gunpowder, out of ammunition. The guys in this first fortification hold off the final British assault so that the rest of the army can retreat back to Cambridge. So at the end of the day, the British hold this ground, which is then technically a victory. However, their objective had been to be over here. And this American force, which the British thought was just a bunch of rabble, was able to hold off 2 full British assaults, and they only had to retreat when they were out of ammunition. And while the battle is going on, the British also noticed snipers here in the town of Charlestown, so their ship set fire to Charlestown and burned it. So this is the Battle of Bunker Hill, and I think this may be a good time for me to stop talking, although I could go on and give you a chance to talk among yourselves about your primary research project. Are there any questions before we do that? I apologize for making this into a monologue about what's happening at Bunker Hill. Yes, Lila, you have your hand up? Is that still your hand up?
That was from before.
Okay. Okay. So I'll put you into breakout rooms. And then if you haven't actually started your project, that's okay. You can get ideas from people who have. Hopefully someone in the group will have started something. Otherwise, we'll be kind of stuck. Okay. So you've been invited to join breakout rooms.
I'm clicking join breakout room, but nothing's happening.
Let me see. You're Jake, or you? Yeah.
Yeah, Jake.
Okay. Should be okay. You're not able to get into 2, so I'm going to put you in 3 and see if that works.
Okay.
Are you able to get in?
No, I'm still clicking it and it's keeping me here.
Let's see.
Just my luck.
Yeah. I mean, I see you as in breakout room 3.
Are you in a breakout room too?
No, I'm not.
There's a third person. I don't know if this is like
Dylan, are you in a breakout room? Let's see.
Yeah, it's weird when I click it. It just I never received like an invitation, but at
Really?
the bottom it says join. So maybe
Yeah.
that should
Click.
be.
Did you click that? Nothing happened?
Yeah.
Well, what are you working on?
I got stuck with you. I don't know yet. I don't know yet. I'm trying to figure that out.
Okay. Well, do you have any
I was
ideas?
hoping to get ideas from some other people to influence
Okay.
some options for me.
Let's see. Dylan, are you there? He might have just tuned out. Let me just see if I can get you into a room. I'm sorry.
No worries. Let me try to click it again. That's weird. Why is that happening to me? Huh.
Okay, I'm going to check out some of the other rooms while you keep trying that.
Okay. No, it's just
Just us.
it's just
Wait, are we supposed to leave or?
I think we're allowed to leave.
yeah. We can be. This pretty much is the same. That's weird.
Like, I don't know if he was expecting us to leave class.
Is there a way to see if anybody is still? What if
There's-
everyone
Oh,
already?
wait,
we just-
Yeah, I think we're done. This is it.
yeah, I think it says wait, but if he left, I don't know. This is weird.
I just don't see a way to be able to.
He's probably in a room right now.
Oh wait, it says host
Oh, he's
now.
back. He's the host now. It's,
Wait, where is he?
well, it said yeah.
Yeah, it did. I feel like
Do you think we can leave?
I like want to, but I want to wait like a minute and see if like something.
Dylan, what happened to your room?
He's been here the whole time. He never got
Oh,
into
yeah.
the break room in the beginning. I was doing a thing with him too.
Oh, okay.
I think we can go.
Wait, can't we like call?
There might be like a technical error. Maybe he's trying to figure it out.
I feel like we can go. It's 5:46.
I think we're
Yeah,
good.
yeah. Let's get out of here. All right, guys. Next class.
Uh,
Oh, hello, Lizette. You followed me.
Yeah.
Let me see.